Welcome to Fjook Enterprises YouTube channel. As always, I'm your host Fjook. Recently, I've been interested in learning more about War Machine. So in order to do that, I decided to reach out to one of my friends who plays War Machine, Michael McAvoy?
Michael McAvoy. Still not the worst it's been butchered, but I appreciate the try. Oh, hello everybody.
For those people who always watch my videos, those 3 to 4 people that always watch my videos who probably don't know anything about War Machine, how would you describe it?
All right, so War Machine is a game produced by Privateer Press, a company based out of Washington, and it is a steampunk fantasy war game and role-playing system. It has an incredibly tight rule system that allows for clean, clear play with very little room for questions about rule interactions. It's one of the stronger parts of the game, I find. The game has 2 separate but compatible parts. War Machine, which focuses on the primarily human kingdoms and their steampunk-powered walking machines, the aforementioned war machines, and then there is the Horde side. These are the wilder factions of Imran, the continent on the world of Cain. Hordes is where you go if you think killing a roided-up 14-foot-tall werewolf carrying a massive sword to cut down a 40-foot dragon spawn is a good idea. There is also Combination Faction, the newest one to be released by Privateer Press, called the Infernals. These creatures use a hybrid system that combines the rule systems from both War Machine and Hordes to create a new and fun experience. Now, all 3 are compatible. You can have a War Machine army against a Hordes army, and there are no structural differences, really. The basic premise of the game is that, well, 2 players present equal-sized armies and roll dice until only one is left standing. Winning can be done in one of 3 ways. Killing the enemy general, which in the game goes by Warcaster for War Machine, Warlock for Hordes, and Infernal Master for Infernals. The other 2 ways are to score more than 5 victory points than your opponent via controlling zones on the 4x4 map, or just have your opponent's clock run out. Now that last one tends to be the more rare ones and focuses primarily on tournament play. For just funsy games or, your weekly beer night out with your friends, clocks aren't super important.
What about the War Machine caught your attention?
I was 28 at the time, and in a position that I was comfortable in order to say that I want to get into the tabletop games. I'd always been interested in them. I'd seen them on the shelves in the comic book stores, but I'd never felt as if I was in a place that I could. I had moved around a lot when I was a kid, and we grew up pretty poor, but thankfully, did a lot of hard work on myself, as well as the wonderful work of my partner, Sylvia. We were in a place financially where I thought, okay, I want to collect a bunch of plastic crack. So I went down to my local game store and looked at the options available. I saw the ones that I liked, went back home, started researching it. This then led me to a list of either War Machine and Hordes or Warhammer 40k. These are the ones that caught my eye the most. So I did a lot of investigation, and frankly, I still wasn't convinced either way. There were a lot of fancy battle reports on YouTube from both companies, and I decided to go back into my local game store after reading a suggestion that said, if you're stuck between both of them, go in, grab a box, hold them in either hand, and just see which one calls to you more. Look at the aesthetic of the games. Look at how you feel about them, right? And so that's what I did. I had a Protectorate of Menoth from War Machine in one hand, and a Space Marine starter set, the Ultramarines, in the other. And I was like, okay, what do I like more? And I was going back and forth, but still completely indecisive until one of the more regular individuals to the store blindsided me, walked from behind, grabbed the War Machine box out of my hand, and said in a rather rude voice, "Oh, you won't be needing this," and walked off with it. Now, I have an incredibly short temper, I have been working on this, and as I found out, it's related to my ADHD disability. However, at the time, I was considering putting his head through the wall. Thankfully, a store employee saw my slow rise to red of that of a lobster as rage overtook me, intercepted me, and brought another box, and we started talking. And that's actually how I met a good friend of mine. So he then said, hey, I can't do anything today. Why don't you come back tomorrow? I'll give you a demo of War Machine as I play it as well. So calm down. I agreed to it. Came back the next day. We had a friendly demo where he showed off the mechanics of the game and how it all works. And I was hooked then.
Earlier, you referred to it as plastic crack. Is it really that expensive, War Machine?
It can be. The average starting price, I usually price about at $500. This covers everything if you're completely new to the entire modeling system. This covers your files, your glue, any lights or lamps you might think you need, paintbrushes, and paint. There are a lot of loss-leading starter packs available for War Machine, so you can get a pretty good deal on them. However, that being said, one Warjack or Warbeast usually will cost you about $50, right? And in a list that, say, you can bring 10 or 12 of them, that starts to add up quickly. That's not even including the cost of the Warcaster or any support solos that you might want to bring along. So I would say that shop online. There is a thriving secondary market available where they offer like 30 to 50% off the MSRP price. Obviously, you want to try to support your friendly local game store as much as possible, but if money is an issue, always look for the secondary markets. They're available on Facebook or their own websites, such as Bargain Town. There's a lot of options for people who want to save money.
Before I met you, I never heard of War Machine, but I had heard of Warhammer 40k. How does Warhammer 40k is obviously much more popular. How does War Machine compare and differ?
Well, in order to answer that question, there's two parts. There's the actual game mechanics and there's the actual company philosophies behind the two. In terms of game mechanics, the easiest way to describe the difference is that with War Machine, you're moving the models in a unit one by one, and each one attacks separately. So while in 40k, you move them as a blob and they all attack as a blob, right? Also with War Machine, when you roll your attack and damage, that's it. There's no, you have to make your weapon attack. You have to make your weapon skill check. You have to make your damage roll, and all sorts of other stuff like that. And then on the defensive, you'd make your save, your invulnerability save, your armor save, your hallelujah save, your all sorts of other saves. I find it to be a lot clearer on the attack and damage roll portion for War Machine. With Warhammer 40k, they also have a lot more stages in order to do things. For instance, there's the assault phase, there's the charging phase, there's the psychic phase, and all that. With War Machine, it's boiled down to 3 phases: the maintenance, the control, and the activation phase. So in my personal opinion, it's a lot neater and cleaner to play. With, I believe even Games Workshop magazine White Wolf itself said that at the time, Games Workshop was a model company that had a game system all over top of it. If you wanted to play a game system that had models for it, then you should look elsewhere to a different company. They didn't say him by name, but it was heavily implied to be War Machine. I know that's not the direct quote, so you'll have to pardon me for that, but that is the key design philosophy, that War Machine is designed to be a game that is played seriously and is focused on the gameplay, while with Games Workshop, it focuses on the models. Now, company-wise, I actually prefer Games Workshop at this point rather than Privateer Press. The reason being is that Games Workshop has a large and sometimes good, sometimes bad history. I think recently, with their decision to change their executive team over and embrace a lot of the craziness that is Warhammer and Warhammer 40K, that they've really seen a new explosion of popularity. Whereas with Privateer Press, I think they started in like 2005, 2006, and they had the small guy grew too big problem, where it was just Matt Wilson, the CEO and founder of the company, and a couple of his buddies. They created this variant adventure for 3.5 D&D, which was the setting for War Machine. And it was released. It was entered into a contest, which it came in second place to Eberron. And the group there decided, you know what, this is a great idea. Let's try and make models. And so they, I believe the first time that War Machine was ever released to the public was at Gen Con, and they were handing away their sales with the models in brown paper bags because that's what they had available to them. So it seems as if there's definitely was a missing link between the professionalism that Privateer Press is missing compared to Games Workshop. This follows through with my current problem with Privateer Press, in that the company has a removed executive team. As far as I know, none of their executives are actually at the headquarters. They're across different states, which creates a huge problem if you've ever worked in an office. I mean, imagine you need a decision and your boss is not available. You have to either wait or you have to make a decision, which might later be retconned. So I've seen it pop up again and again. And in fact, it did come to a boiling point about a year ago where several high-profile members of the Privateer Press team had left. Mostly they were on okay terms, but I could tell that there was that subtle frustration from the way that Privateer Press handles their upper management decisions. So my hope would be that Privateer Press would frankly, sell the company to perhaps someone more local and get a dedicated executive management team there at the headquarters. I think having someone there that represents the executive team and that can make those higher up decisions would be a great idea and change to the company.
To switch gears slightly, you actually play in tournaments, if I understand correctly.
That's correct.
How's the meta change in War Machine?
All right, so the way I'll just use the most current system in the Mark III, so the third edition of the game. When right now Privateer Press operates on a 6-month dynamic update cycle. What this means is that they are very much on the pulse for the community. They're very involved in Facebook, on Discord, Twitter, all that. They want to know what their players feel about the current state of the game and how they can make it easier or more accessible, or change certain rules in case there are a problem. Privateer Press also sponsors or hosts several tournaments as well, and their development team actually heads down to these so they can find out how the tournaments progress. With that being said, the dynamic updates, as previously mentioned, they're a collection of all of the problem rules associated with the models or with the base game itself that need to be tweaked in some way. Whether it be a oversight in how a rule interaction works, such as there was at one point a time when you couldn't hit a model that was knocked down, which is a big problem because the whole reason you knock down a model is to hit it without rolling dice. You just want to damage it. So that technically was a problem, but they fixed that. Or say a rule specific to a model that is causing problems. There was a big boogeyman in the meta Iona for the faction Circle of Orboros, and she was basically winning all the tournaments. So The development team gathered all sorts of data. They didn't make a quick snap decision, which would have angered a lot of the community. Instead, they waited, they gathered a whole bunch of information, and then made a smart decision on how to change Iona, which I thought was really good of them. They didn't jump to a change and then suffer the consequences after. So I really enjoy how their dynamic update systems work. As well, they recently started doing what is known as a CID, Community Integrated Development. Basically, this lets the players beta test the rules for large expansions that are coming out, so as to better fine-tune the models. This is done via battle reports that are submitted to their CID website. The developers take all those reports, as well as the player's opinion on how the models are performing at that point, and will adjust accordingly. Usually, it's about a 2 to 3 week process per release, and then about 2 to 3 months later, after the CID testing is done, the new models are released to the public. Those are when generally the metas shift once the new product is unveiled. And here's another subplot. The North American meta and the European meta, completely different. Which is really weird when you compare how the North American meta and the European meta all function together. The North American meta is very much a strong, competitive, but open community. And with the Europeans being much more lackadaisical in their approach, not to say that they're not competitive, but it's just they seem to be much more open and not as hardcore competitive to the US meta. And then there's Canada, who just tend to win all the American and European tournaments. We have a lot of fantastic players in this country, and for the large part, we're just cleaning up the trophies. For instance, I'm recently participated in an online tournament, and the top 4 players are 3 Canadians and 1 American. So, goes to show we know our stuff here.
Getting back to a point that you mentioned earlier, that it's seen as more simple than Warhammer, I think is what you said. How hard is it to learn War Machine?
My correction on it. It's not that War Machine is simpler than 40K, it's that it's more streamlined. In my opinion, it tends to be easy to learn, but hard to teach. There is a lot to this game, with hard-coded rules from the rulebook that are circumvented by abilities that models possess. As such, in my experience teaching the game, it can be very easy to over-explain the rules to no players and chase them away with the gobbledygook coming out of your mouth. Taking it slow and easy and introducing the new players to the game gradually is what I've learned that works the best. As the guy in our meta who tends to teach new players, I have a lot of practice with this. With 40K, it's that they have so many additional steps to doing the one thing, whereas with War Machine, it's very much a condensed version of the 40K system.
A follow-up question to that: how hard is it to master War Machine?
Now, that question, it is hard to master. With the game having such clear-cut rules, there is very little room for creative interpretations that could be found in other games. However, with the rules being so clear-cut, there are many stages to doing an action that can be interrupted by your opponent if they have a model that can do so. For instance, charging a model in War Machine has 4 stages to it. The declaring the line of sight, the actual movement of the model that's being charged, that's charging, the attack roll, and then the damage roll. Any of these steps, your opponent can interrupt with an ability or spell. So being aware of how that interacts and the entire lexicon of rolls, abilities, spells that are on the models can take a lot to take in. Being aware of these possibilities is the tricky part of the game that requires some practice to get good at. However, we do start with we do start every game with a handshake, though less so now because of the pandemic, and end them with a handshake. This is the show that we are giving respect to our opponent, win or lose, and that we leave all bad feelings on the table. Of course, that's easier said than done, and I myself may have grumbled a bit for plays that I have made or just the incredible luck of my opponent's dice, but we tend to be a fairly, at least in our Alberta meta, very much a welcome and opening group that caters to all skill levels, all levels of competitive play.
From talking with you in the past briefly about this, if I recall correctly, you have more than one army. Do you use the same army that you go to tournaments that you do to teach? And what are your armies?
All right, so with that, I right now I currently have 4 armies. I have the Circle of Ouroboros and the I have minions, which are subdivided into 2 factions: the Thornfall Alliance, and the Blindwater Congregation, and then I have my War Machine army, which is the Cadoran Empire. When I teach the game, I ask the person if they want to learn the War Machine system or the Horde system. The War Machine system uses Focus. The Horde system uses Fury. Fury tends to be the easier one to teach, where the Focus system is a bit more punishing to the new players. Not to say that the Fury system is the better one. There's a lot of tournaments that are won by War Machine armies, just as many as are won by the Hordes. It's just more of a personal preference. So what I do is that I always encourage, once we're done the demo stage, I always encourage players to look at the army that you think you'll like the most, and then we will play games based around that. So, for instance, if they really like the look of the Horde army, the Legion of Everblight, which is all about mutated dark elves and dragon spawn, then I will bring my Hordes army, so my Circle of Ouroboros and my minions, so that they have that mechanical training of how to use the Fury system. That is what I like to do. Now, when I bring my list to a tournament, what I prefer to do is whatever army catches my fancy that at that time, I will play them, and then I will refine my tournament lists with my local meta. Thankfully, we're all pretty good friends there, and they know a lot. They know that I practice for tournaments, but we have a couple other people that come up with me as well, and so they're very lenient in that. I like to play, pretty unforgiving lists at times, and they step to the plate. They play right back. They play unforgiving lists right back to me, and then afterwards we sit down and we go, okay, what can we change? How would you have done this differently if this had happened? Right? We call it a theory machine, and it can be very helpful to identifying misplays that happened and how to avoid them at tournaments. After my lists are finalized, I go off and I do my best. Now, unfortunately, in I believe the 6 years of playing now, I've yet to win a tournament. I did come pretty close one time, but I lost in the second round, which bumped me from the winner's circle. But still, I always have a great time.
So, one final question for this round: Does the tabletop game influence the lore of the role-playing side of things?
Well, that is a slightly dead-end question, because unfortunately there is not much of a role-playing game anymore. I did find that reading all of the fluff in the books, they tended to have more in-depth detail than the snippets released for the war game, but all in all, it was consistent, right? So there wasn't any big changes to the role-playing system based upon the war game and vice versa. So they were, frankly, and also it's mostly because they were written all by like the same group of the story fluff wise was all written by the same group of like 3 to 4 guys. So that was nice for internal consistency.
Thank you, Michael, for your time. We'll have to do a part 2 where we talk about the fluff, because we didn't really get into that this time at all. And
no problem.
From the sounds of it, there's a lot of fluff.
Oh, there is. There's a overarching history to the Iron Kingdoms and a lot of minuata between the warcasters and warlocks. They are the larger than life heroes for their respective factions. That to other people, to the other factions, they're the villains, right? So they would be your well-known individuals, such as your Mussolinis, your Hitlers, your Eisenhowers, your Rommels, your we could even use modern-day influences like Obama, Trump, or Trudeau, right? They're the people who are instant name brand recognitions for that nation's armies, and they're the ones who help shape the history and the future of the Iron Kingdoms. So there's a lot of stuff we can talk about there. Thank you very kindly for having me today. I hope to come back, and I hope people learn something, and maybe I pique their interest. So,
you definitely piqued my interest, if that counts for anything.
Fantastic. Well, we'll come up with some new questions. I'll get these responses, and we'll go from there. I look forward to listening to this.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you kindly, and you have a great day.
You as well. And as always, comment.